Hey everybody, I'm Alicia. I'm the Partner Engagement Coordinator with North Carolina Alliance for Health.
And I'm Marianne, and I'm the programs manager.
And today we are going to dive into all things school meals. So let's get started. So let's start by talking about the school nutrition programs as a whole. So these programs offer food and nutrition assistance to children in our schools. These are federal or federally assisted programs. So that's a little bit confusing. So let's talk about that for a second. What this means is really these programs aren't a all encompassing federal program. These will not function without that state and local component to make that run. So really they're federally assisted. So they are administered locally by school food authorities, and you'll see that kind of talked about as FSAs in case that comes up. All public schools in North Carolina participate in these programs. That is a mandatory program. And then you'll see some charter schools opt in. About one third of those schools do opt into school nutrition programs. And it's important to note that the North Carolina school nutrition program is the seventh largest in the country.
And Alicia, that means hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yes.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a huge program.
Lots of dollars. So let's talk about the programs. Marianne, can you dive into this for us?
Yeah. School nutrition programs and more broadly, child nutrition programs encompass a lot of individual programs that are all separate and have their own rules and regulations that govern them. The largest one by far is the National School Lunch Program. And that's the one that provides the low cost or free lunches to kids in public schools, some private schools, residential care facilities, and it reimburses for meals served. It also reimburses a small amount for paid meals served because the paid amount doesn't cover the full cost of meals. Like the National School Lunch Program, the school breakfast program is a similar structure. It is a much less utilized program compared to the National School Lunch Program. But again, in North Carolina, when feasible, it's in every public school and it's in a large chunk of our charter schools. It's in all of our residential schools. The summer food service program is the one that allows free meals and snacks to children and teens 0 to 18 in low income areas across the summer. And that goes with the seamless summer option, which is allows all the meals to be reimbursed at the free rate. It also loosens a little bit of some of the other rules and regulations, but some of them are still there and make it really challenging to administer. An example of that would be in a traditional year, um, the seamless summer option doesn't alleviate the congregate food setting. And that means kids have to be in a group to eat. So it's really hard to um, feed them breakfast in one setting and you can't send a lunch home with them, for example. They would have to come twice or they'd have to be there over the course of the whole day. And that works for some programs, but it doesn't work for others and it's challenging in rural areas. We saw a lot of those waivers provided during COVID so that the reimbursement rates were higher. We saw the seamless summer option always has a higher reimbursement rate. They were able to feed in non-congregate settings so people could pick up meals. More meals were delivered. It was a really interesting opportunity to see how these waivers would look. And a lot of them were super successful. What other kind of programs do we have, Alicia? CACFP is the Child and Adult Care Food Program, and that's the program that provides the reimbursements for meals and snacks that are served to children and adults at child care centers, at adult daycare centers, and facilities like that. There's also the after school snack program, the special milk program, and the fresh fruit and vegetable program. All of these are programs that are administered by the USDA and provide extra sources of high quality nutrition for children throughout the day.
So lots of amazing programs that we have here in our state. All right, so let's chat a little bit about the free and reduced price meals. So these are school meals that are subsidized to account for the economic need of families. So these meals have to be, you have to be eligible to receive these meals, and the eligibility status is determined by a number of ways. One of those being the household income application that's approved at the public school unit level, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. You can also be eligible by direct certification and categorical eligibility. So, those that are homeless, migrant families, foster or Head Start, those folks are automatically eligible for free and reduced price meals. And then also, schools can participate in the community eligibility provision. And we're also going to dive into that a little bit deeper in just a moment. Anything to add there, Marianne, on this eligibility status?
No. But as you can see, it's complicated, right?
Very
There's
complicated.
multiple ways that people can be declared eligible. Um, some year you might be in one category or your school might participate in the community eligibility provision, and the next year you're somewhere else and it doesn't. And then maybe you have to do an application. So it's just a really complicated process um, that school nutrition programs go through.
Absolutely. So let's see if we can dive in this to a little bit deeper so we can clear some things up. So let's talk a little bit about the community eligibility provision. So this is a meal service option that allows schools that are located in those high poverty areas to provide universal free breakfast and lunch. So this eligibility is determined by an identified student percentage, and you'll see that often identified as ISP, and that has to be 40% of or higher. So that means that at least 65 to 70% of students are eligible for free and reduced price meals. And like we said, that is determined by a number of factors. So many schools that are eligible don't participate because it's just too expensive. And Marianne, can you explain kind of how that works a little bit?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say that ISP is calculated by the USDA every year, every 3 years, and then it's recalculated right at the end of that. So schools can go in and out of being eligible kind of on a 3-year rotation, especially if they're kind of marginal. Um, so the there's also what's called a multiplier. And so your identified student percentage is multiplied by this multiplier, which is 1.6. And that is the percent of meals that will be reimbursed at the free rate. And then the remainder of the meals will be reimbursed at the paid rate. So if you have an identified student percentage of 40 and the multiplier is 1.6, which is what it is right now, then about 62% of your meals are going to be reimbursed at the free rate, which is the higher rate. And then the rest of your meals will be reimbursed at the paid rate. So you can see that if you're a school that is really successful in getting your applications in for free reduced lunch, that it may make more sense at the moment to stay in that system. Now, of course, there's staffing time that goes into that. You have to process the free reduced meal applications. You have to sometimes chase people down to get them if necessary. But it may make more sense. But it's at the cost of all the paperwork. It's at the cost of these kids that are barely not eligible or whose parents are uncomfortable filling out a form or just don't want to fill out a form. Um, all of these kids will then not automatically get a free meal like they would if your school participated in the CEP program.
Got it.
So,
So also there's that added layer too, right? Of if, 1 year your school could be eligible, but 3 years from now they may not be. And so that's another added layer of stress for our families.
stress for families, stress for child nutrition directors, stress for schools. The fact that some schools are eligible, but some schools that are maybe only a little bit different are not,
Right. Yeah.
it causes a lot of stress for school districts too. One of the things we hear a lot is that, decision makers at the local level really don't want to offer a program, say at, East Elementary, when West Elementary really isn't that different, but they can't have that.
Right.
Um, that causes a lot of tension locally as well. That's maybe not necessary.
Exactly. Okay, so I think that this slide helps us kind of visualize a little bit of who's eligible for free and reduced price meals. So you can see here, just as an example, a family of four Looking at their annual income, so they would be eligible for free meals if they made $36,075 or less. Correct, Miriam?
Looking at the number, yes. Yes, if they make that amount or less, that's the end.
Yes, and then they would be eligible for reduced price if they made 51,338 or less. And this is as their household income, not per person. So that's important
Correct.
to know. And then for every additional household member, you would see at the bottom, you would add that amount to their income that would make them eligible. Anything to add on this slide?
Yeah, I would just say keep in mind in North Carolina that the majority of our students are eligible for free or reduced price meals already. Oh, about
Mhm.
60%,
I was about to
on
say
an
that's about
average year.
60%, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, it's about
Like
60%. And some districts go as high, they go into the 90s. And some districts are as low as maybe the 20s. But
mhm.
these are not, it's never the case where it's just, one or two children. It's by far in North Carolina, it's most of our children.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to note that we see some students that may not be eligible by even $100. That happens often.
Yeah, and if you're a family like ours, if you're a family of four, and you're not eligible by $100, and two of your kids are eating meals in schools, you're going to spend that $100 on the full price meal. You're gonna spend
Abs-
that easily in a couple weeks. But that $100 is over the course of the year, right?
Right.
Um, and that money is probably already allocated. I'd also like to just remind everyone that this year in North Carolina, the reduced price meal copay for lunch for families is covered. So if your family qualifies for reduced price lunch, it's actually free. It's always free for breakfast if you qualify for reduced price breakfast. But this year, the General Assembly has also covered lunch.
Okay, so what you're saying is every year the breakfast copay is always covered, but this year in particular, the leaders have also extended that copay payment for lunches as well.
Yep, they have covered breakfast, the breakfast copay since 2010, 2011. It's been a long time investment that they've made.
Nice. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the administration. Marianne, you want to tackle this one?
No, but I will. So, you know, the administration of school meal programs starts at the federal level and it's housed under Food and Nutrition Services in the USDA. To make things more complicated, in North Carolina, it's administered at the state level, not in our Department of Agriculture, but in our Department of Public Instruction at DPI. And from the USDA on down, there are really detailed, really complicated, and really strict guidelines and rules about school meals, from the nutrition standards, how much sodium is in a meal, how much fat, how much added sugar, what color or vegetables are you serving enough different colored vegetables on a regular basis? What are the portion sizes? All of those are laid out. But then there are additional rules around when meal times are for breakfast, lunch, um, feeding in groups, a congregate setting, rules around pickup, who's eligible, and what the reimbursement rates are. So it's very strict at the federal level, but then at the state level, we also have a lot of supports for the program. So at DPI, there's a team of folks that help our school nutrition authorities implement these rules, that audit the programs to ensure that they are following the rules with fidelity, that they are doing what they should be doing, and that they are implementing the program in the way that's intended. And then at the local level, they have all of these rules, they have the support from DPI, but they have a lot of freedom then to kind of implement it in the way that they see fit within these rules. So it may have sounded like I didn't describe a lot of freedom, but we're talking about, if your community has a large number of children from East Asian families, um, certainly you're absolutely free to either create or find compliant meals that accommodate those dietary preferences. And you should, right?
Right.
And we see a lot of creativity, a lot of community engagement and a lot of investment at the community level, at the school, and at the school nutrition authority school district level. And then finally, there's what are called waivers. And those are waivers of a rule, right? So we see that a lot with we saw it a lot with COVID, and again the seamless summer option, and the summer feeding rules. There was a waiver on meal times. There was a waiver on the congregate setting, and that means they waive the rule from being enforced right now.
Right. I think that it's really cool that at the local level, they're given, our school nutrition programs are given the freedom to kind of change up the meals. So, for example, if I'm looking at the Wake County school nutrition schedule and menu versus, let's say, for example, Pitt County, those aren't going to look the same. They get to kind of choose what they're making.
They're not going to look the same, and they have the ability to work with local farmers that meet the requirements to sell to schools, to work with them to make sure their things are included. Certainly, I live in Wake County, um, and we see, at least one vegetarian option on the menu every single day. Um, so there's a lot of freedom and creativity, and at the state level, they even have what's called the K-12 Culinary Academy, which is a really well thought out training program for child nutrition workers and managers to um, work on honing, their kitchen skills, honing their food safety skills, and developing these really delicious, healthy and compliant recipes.
That's awesome. I just have to say, I was looking at my county's menu yesterday just because I was curious, and I will say it looked absolutely delicious. Definitely better than what I'm preparing at home for myself.
100%. I have 4 kids that are already in public school and they eat school lunch every single day. They don't normally make it in time for breakfast, although they do like breakfast. And I would say 9 days out of 10, they really enjoy the school meal. My kids have preferences. A couple of them are picky eaters, so I wouldn't say that they're, the perfect students for eating school meals. But overall, they really enjoy the meals. The meals are really healthy and delicious. I think they're really critical in exposing my kids to fruits and vegetables that I don't prefer, so I don't normally buy at the store.
Mhm.
An example would be peaches. I don't like peaches, so I don't buy peaches. But my daughter Emma actually loves peaches, and we know that because she kept getting them at school. She called them the juicy peaches. They were the peaches that
Love
are canned
that.
in 100% juice. And I mean, not only did I start buying peaches when they're in season and fresh and so she can eat them, but I even canned peaches for her this year. So I think the school meals are kind of an unsung hero in helping entire families eat better, expand our palates, just eat different things. I love school meals and I'm glad that they're a resource available to my children.
I agree. I agree. All right, let's talk a little bit about this funding. So, child nutrition reauthorization, this is done every 5 years, but we're a little behind on this, right, Marianne? When's the last time that we did this?
We're so behind. The last time we did it, it was in 2010. It's the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. And you hear it a lot with like people will say it's like Michelle Obama's school lunches. The fact
Right.
is, the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act is just the most recent in a long line of child nutrition reauthorizations that have made efforts to improve school meals, to adjust the meal patterns and standards to what we know about nutrition at the time, which
Mhm.
changes over time, right? Um,
Absolutely.
so certainly, I would never argue that it was a perfect child nutrition reauthorization. But it is the child nutrition reauthorization that outlined things like the CEP program, right?
Hmm.
Um, so it brought a lot of really good things to our schools. CEP, local wellness policies, really supported the work of SHACs, school health advisory committees across the state. So we are behind on that reauthorization. We stand to continue being behind that reauthorization.
Okay. So this Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, this was the most recent one done in 2010. Like you said, it required schools to implement those local wellness policies and stricter nutrition standards for school meals. But like we said, this expired in 2015. Our nutrition, what we know about that changes over time. So, but this is where we are right now, and we'll keep on keeping on.
I think
All
it's worth
right.
noting also, Alicia, that in North Carolina, many of our districts were already complying with stricter nutrition standards anyway.
Hmm.
So a lot of the feedback that you heard nationally was less true here because our child nutrition managers and our school nutrition authorities were already exceeding national standards.
Because they're just that good.
They are that good.
All right, so let's talk about the funding. So, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you have that federal funding that comes down to help out. So, this is the reimbursements for the free and reduced price meals, and they are paid for meals that are actually served. So, this is not money that is given ahead of time. This is based on the meals that are actually served day to day. And then we have the state reimbursements. So these are the reimbursements for the free and reduced price breakfast and lunch copays that we talked about. And then there's a mandated amount of money that is brought down for that admin side of things. And then you have your local funding. So this is student meal payments from the reduced price and full price, excuse me, the reduced price and full price meals for those a la carte items. Anything to add there?
No, I think that covered it. We often hear from folks that they're concerned that maybe child nutrition workers they don't want to see them make more than teachers.
Mhm.
And certainly I think we support adequate living wages for all of our workers.
Right.
But I also think it's worth noting that child nutrition managers are managing budgets of millions and millions of dollars.
Sure.
Um, they are doing really complicated, difficult, challenging work. And I think a lot of times we have this stereotype of like a lunch lady, and their work is much more complicated than that. It's much more refined than that. And we have to ensure that they're paid as professionals.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think, worth noting that our school nutrition programs are a separate entity than from your general school budget. So they are manning a whole entire different thing by themselves.
And we're talking like the reimbursements from the USDA pre-COVID were well over, they were over $400 million.
That's a lot.
And so we're not talking about, small amounts of money. These are a lot of funds that are coming through.
Right. And I think it's also notable to say, no funding that is provided from any sources for their salary and their benefits, which includes that legislatively mandated salary increases, health insurance costs, except those required matching funds that draw down from the federal dollars. Okay, let's talk about these reimbursement rates. This can get a little confusing as well. So, Marianne, you want to kind of refine this for us?
Um, yes, yes. So let's start with a couple definitions. Severe need is where 40% or more of the lunches served to students at a school during the second preceding school year were at free or reduced price rate. And then a high lunch is where 60% or more of the lunches served were at free or reduced rate. So we have the regular reimbursement rates, and then we have the reimbursement rates that are for if your school is severe or high need, right? Um, so the full reimbursement for a free lunch at just a regular school, like the school around the corner, is $4.33. If you are a school with severe need or high lunch, then that's 4.35. It's not really a huge difference, right? You
No.
see a bigger difference at the breakfast level where it's 226 versus 267. And then all the way down to the paid reimbursements. So the paid reimbursements are 77 cents and 79 cents for lunch and 50 cents for breakfast. The reduced price meal reimbursement comes in the middle, right? At
Mhm.
$3.93 and $3.95. Now, it's worth noting, if you're like our area, the reduced price meal copay would have been 40 cents. And that's what the state is covering. And so that 40 cents only brings you to, about that 435 if you're in a severe need area, right?
Right.
So it's that 395 plus that 40 cent copay brings you to 435. Um, but what we really need to do now, Alicia, is talk about the cost of meals.
Yes, I think that'll help us clear things up a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about the cost of to produce a meal for these school nutrition programs. So in the school year of 2019, 2020, 30% of our districts were in debt because of the cost of producing the school meals exceeded that rate of reimbursement. And I think it's worth noting that this debt has gotten worse over time due to inflation and things like that. So these costs that they're having to cover include, in addition to their staff salaries and benefits, because remember, the school nutrition programs cover their salary and benefits on their own. So they're also having to cover that food and preparation supplies, the commercial preparation, and the service equipment that they're using, all of their software and technology, those random indirect costs, and the professional development and staff training that we want them to have so that they're able to feed our children at the best of their ability. So, in the same year, in the same school year, 14% of these districts had negative operating balances, and 18% had less than 1 month's operating balance in their school nutrition account. So, I think that it's also important to note here that these school nutrition programs cannot end a school year in a negative operating balance. Someone has to cover that balance. So, let's talk about school year 18 to 19. The cost to produce a meal was $3.74. In 19 and 20, it was $3.99, and then 2021, $5.67. That is a huge jump, right? So Marion, can you kind of round this out for us, thinking about our reimbursement rates versus our cost?
Yeah, so first I would add, I do the grocery shopping for my family, and I'm sure many of the people listening do too. If we are not at 567 now, we're higher, right? The cost
Agreed.
of things has gone up. I went to the grocery store the other day and it was $4 for a dozen eggs, where it used to be $1. Um, so we are looking at continued increase in food costs. So I think we're going to see a higher number, or at least equal to that number this year.
Mhm.
Um, but 567 is the cost to put a meal on the plate. And that's the statewide average. We are not looking at where labor might be higher, where cost of production might be higher in places like, Wake County. However, the reimbursement, the highest reimbursement is still only $4.35. And so we're really leaving our child nutrition programs just kind of scavengering, right? And they
Yeah.
have ways that they can get costs down. And they use all of them, I assure you. They get certain allotments of commodity products. So every school meal that's served, um, based on how many meals are served, they get allotments of USDA commodity products that include fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grain pastas, all the good things you want to go into meals. And they're able to select what makes most sense for them in their district and their particular schools. Um, that is really the only reason why it makes sense to have, kids that where the full meal plus its reimbursement is, $3 and $4.30 to eat a school meal, right?
Right.
Is because they're able to get the cost of labor per meal down and they're able to get these commodities. They're able to take advantage of programs that like CEP, but it's really, really difficult to make this math work.
Mhm.
If we were looking at a family budget and you said you had $4.35 to spend on a meal and you were spending $5.67, we would all be very distressed, right?
Absolutely. I know I would.
Um, this math is just hard to make work. One of the tools at their disposal is to sell competitive foods, like those a la carte items, those ice creams, bags of chips, things like that, that are available outside of the regular meal pattern.
Mhm.
And those those are not as don't meet the same strict requirements as the full like National School Lunch Program does. However, they do meet really, really strict competitive food guidelines called Smart Stack standards. So if you think your child's picking up an ice cream every day and they're eating the same ice cream you're getting at the store, that would not be true. They're eating ice cream that is higher in calcium, lower in fat, lower in added sugar, and the same thing is true for all the other products that they're selling.
Yeah. So while it's still a little treat, it's going to be healthier than what we would typically get at a grocery store.
Yep, still a little treat, and it helps kind of close that gap. We see school nutrition programs doing really creative things to try to close the gap. Some of them do catering for some events, but that's not their mission, right? Their mission
Mhm.
is to feed children and to feed children in the school context. And everything else that's happening is to help them fulfill their mission. But it's really complicated, it's really difficult, and it shouldn't be so hard.
I agree. I agree. Well, I think we have learned a whole lot today about school meals. Any final thoughts, Marian?
I guess I would say if you haven't eaten a school meal, since you were in school, if your children aren't eating a school meal, give it a try,
Yeah.
right? I
Things are
think you'll be
different
really
these days.
impressed. Things are different. I think you'll be so impressed with the work, that our child nutrition professionals are doing. And I think that if your kids regularly eat school meals like mine, you absolutely will become a believer in the power of school meals to improve how your kids are eating, to improve the climate of a school. I think they're really important.
I agree. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mary Ann, for joining us and giving us all of your knowledge of school meals. I learned something from you every day, and I know that folks are too.